Hello all. So I've been watching some videos, this one in particular about buying a motherboard, and I've just done some upgrades to my system, and I thought that people might be interested in hearing a little bit about the process that I went through on deciding what parts to buy, etc., etc. So I had purchased an Asus computer on Craigslist, and it had an i7 4790 fourth generation processor in it, 16 gigs of DDR3, and I guess it was a 3 terabyte hard drive. And this was to replace a Mac Pro that I had for quite a long time. It was a 2008 Mac Pro 3,1, which was a fine machine and served me very well. I still have it. It's a system that I don't plan on getting rid of because even though I don't turn it on anymore except for just occasionally, I'm too fond of it to part with it. My i7, on the other hand, I don't feel that way about. And although it was a very good system, and I never felt that it was too slow, and there were a few things that I felt didn't run well on it, I had it for about 4 years, and during the past 2 years I've been itching to buy a new system, and I've been shopping around, and I was looking at Threadripper for a long time, which I'm glad I didn't buy, and finally the prices have just come down so much on computers, on parts, that I decided to start buying a few things. So the first thing I did was I bought a new case because I wanted something that looked modern, with a little bit of bling, some LED lighting and that kind of thing. And I bought a matrix case, which was very inexpensive, with glass panels, and it did what I wanted, and it didn't raise the temperature inside my system. I like to monitor the temperature. If you look here, for example, you can see that right now my temperature is under 30 degrees centigrade. So that's a double it and add 30. So it's under 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which is fine. That's not going to burn out the CPU. The thing is, if you have high temperatures inside your system, your components are not going to last very long. And I want my systems to last. I don't want to have a lot of trouble with them. So I actually did get a Threadripper at one point, and the thing was running at, I think, around 80 degrees centigrade. So hotter than boiling water. And I thought, this CPU just isn't going to live very long. So I returned the system, and I'm glad I did. I've been looking at the Ryzen chips, I've been looking at the Intel chips, and finally I made a decision to buy a Ryzen chip. Now I run a Linux system, and consequently I want to make sure that I get something that is going to run well on Linux. Or I should say the opposite. I want to get something for which Linux is going to do well. So sometimes that means not buying the most recent hardware, because it takes a little while for the correct drivers to be written and for bugs to be worked out, etc. So I was looking and looking, and I like this site. let me see if I can find it for you. So this is cpu.userbenchmark.com. And one of the nice things about this site is that you can compare processors. So I had the 4790, not the K, but the 4790, which is a fine CPU. I have no complaints about it. It ran cool and it was fast. According to this, not very fast, but see here the speed rankings for it. And accordingly, workstation, it's a yacht. Not very fast. At least it's not a surfboard, one of their other categories. So if you compare this to an 8700K, for example, which was really the chip that I wanted to get last year was an 8700K, but I just didn't feel ready to make a purchase because the 4790 was running fast enough. And you can see this is only 33% faster, which I don't think is terribly much faster. If you have something that's already fast enough, what good is 33% faster? But if you look here, the workstation speed is quite good on this. But I ended up not getting this. First of all, it runs a bit hot, and the 9700 is available now, and that's the modern chip. But the 9700K, I think, is around $350, which is a lot. And what I was looking at were the Ryzen chips, specifically the 3600. 3600 seems to be the most popular Ryzen chip right now. And I think that's a combination of price and performance. So if you look at this, this is ranked 34th. And it's only a 5% difference from the 8700K. For the workstation, it's a difference of 2%. And that was it. That was my main concern, was how is this going to function as a workstation? I don't play games. My programs were running fast enough for the most part already, but my workstation speeds were slow. And this means that if I am trying to, what's the word for it? Render video or something like that, which takes a lot of cores, or certain things I do in data science, they were a little slow. And I really didn't realize how slow and how much faster this 3600 was until I did a backup. And the backup went really fast. I mean, incredibly fast. One of the first things I did when I got the 4790 system was replace the disk drive with an SSD. And so it went quite a bit faster. Very noticeably different. It's one of the best upgrades you can do for a system is to add an SSD. But this system now, with the 3600, has an M.2 NVMe PCIe slot that takes an M.2 NVMe PCI Gen 3 drive. And this thing just flies. My backups take a minute and a half. Rendering video is 5 minutes maybe, whereas the old system would be an hour. So even though I didn't really think I was getting very much with this upgrade, I've been surprised by how some jobs which were tedious before just fly now. And I appreciate that. So once I decided on the chip I was going to get, and by the way, the 3600X is not that much more expensive. You know, it's, what is that, $30 more, something like that. 25 and 11 is $36 more. Why didn't I get that? Why didn't I go for the faster system? You can see that this is 3% faster because this is plus 2% and it was plus 5%. Well, I didn't see really that I was going to be gaining very much with this chip in terms of speed, but where I was going to lose considerably on this was power consumption. I said earlier that I was worried, and that's not what I want. I want this one here. That I was worried about thermals. Right, so you can see that this gives a 3% difference in speed, even though the rank goes from 34th to 23rd. It's really not that much faster. And if we look down here, I think that we can see the TDP. Right, this is running at 65 watts. This is running at 95 watts. So this is 32% more energy efficient. And you know, if I really wanted to get the fastest chip I could, I would not have gone for something in this range anyway. I would have looked at something like the 3700X, which is considerably more expensive. It's $124 more, which is not crazy expensive. But look, it's only 3% faster. 4% faster, and let's look at the TDP on this. Well, that's interesting. I didn't know that. It's the same. It's 65 watts. It's interesting that the 3700X would actually have a lower TDP than the 3600X. It never even occurred to me. But anyway, this chip is much more expensive, and you're not really gaining very much by going this route. Of course, it has 2 more cores. It has, 2 more cores, which is 4 more threads at basically the same speed. So where it does make quite a difference is in the workstation. It goes from 76% to 92%. This changes less. I might have considered this a little more had I known about the TDP on this. And if this is correct, I have a feeling this is not correct. I have a feeling that this is another 95 watt CPU. But for me, this was a sweet spot. Now, when you have a chip with a higher TDP, it's going to put a lot more stress on the motherboard, specifically on the VRM. So let's see, that's the voltage regulator module. And so if you're going to get a faster chip, you want to get a motherboard with a good VRM. Now, when you go looking around to buy a motherboard, it's the most frustrating thing within buying computer parts imaginable, because the marketing hype is just overwhelming. All these manufacturers come out not with one board, but with a dozen boards, all very, very similar, and with names with marketing names that they all sound like they're the greatest thing. on earth, but I think for example, pro generally means that it's the low end of the spectrum. So if you buy a board that's marked professional, you'd think that you were getting something special, right? But no, that's actually the low end, at least for some of the manufacturers. So when you start looking at these things, it's really a mess. It's all over the place. And so you can look at the voltage regulator module, the VRM, and once again, you have marketing on these things that's just really so tricky. And so you can look at the specifications, and sometimes the specifications are lying, because when you think you're getting one thing, you're actually getting something different. I'm trying to think of the terminology that's used. It's not coming to me right now. But sometimes things are duplicated, so it sounds like you're getting one kind of a VRM, and you're really getting something very different. You can buy something with much better specs that operates more poorly. So even though on paper it sounds like a better VRM, it's actually a worse VRM. So what you really have to turn to when you shop for these things is benchmarking. So there are people that will buy a dozen of these boards, and they'll benchmark every one of them, and they'll look at the thermals and other kinds of things, and that's what you have to turn to. So I spent a long time looking at motherboards, and for this 3600, because it has a low TDP, pretty much everybody is recommending the MSI Tomahawk, B450 Tomahawk Max, which is I think $114 right now. And from all accounts, it seems to be a good board with a good VRM and middle of the range features. So you're not necessarily going to get as many ports and so on and so forth. I think it only has one M.2 PCIe slot, for example. So that really was my first choice for a motherboard, but I kept looking, and I wanted to see what else was out there. And I discovered that you can get some pretty good bargains in x570 boards. Now, the x570 chipset is a more advanced chipset, and it's likely that as new Ryzen chips come out, the x570 chipset is going to stay relevant for longer than the B450. So even though I don't need an x570 board right now, I thought, wouldn't this be nice to have 3 years from now, when there are new chips available, new CPUs available, that are going to require more power, a higher wattage, a higher TDP. And I started looking at them, and they were quite a bit more expensive. The low end is over $200, or around $200. And then I discovered that Amazon sells returns of these boards, and I started looking into that. And so I ended up buying one for around $150. So the B450 board was going to cost me $114. It didn't seem like I was paying that much of a premium to get a board that was probably going to give me slightly better thermals, Probably was going to make the my chip last a little longer, because the power probably would be applied to the chip more evenly because of the better VRM on it. Because that's one of the things that you'll find on the x570 boards, is they really are meant for the higher end Ryzen chips that require more power. So there's a better VRM on them. And there were also a couple of other things that I really liked about the board. For example, it had two M.2 slots. So that's the one I picked up. And I've been very happy with it. It works very well. And I think that it's going to be give me a good upgrade path 3 years down the line. It also had the ability to have more RAM installed. And I'd like to talk a bit about the RAM because you can get different speeds of RAM. And I got 3200 gigahertz RAM. I could have gotten 36. I could have gotten, I think it goes upwards of 4,000. But I didn't get that because from what I've read, the 3600, the Ryzen 3600 works best with the 3200 gigahertz RAM. And I was going to get 32 gigabytes. I was going to get either 4 8 gigabyte RAM, what are they called? Well, pieces of RAM. Or I was going to get two 16 gigabyte RAM modules, but I didn't. I got two 8 gigabyte RAM modules. I only put 16 gigabytes in right now because from what I understand, and I did quite a bit of research on this, a lot of motherboards, and especially the one I bought, because it's a daisy, so-called daisy chain motherboard. In other words, the RAM slots are accessed going serially down one wire, or serially down a series of wires. I'm not exactly sure the details on this, but it's optimized for 16 gigabytes in 2 of the slots. And if you put 4 sticks of RAM in, you can actually have some timing issues that can lead to overall diminishment of performance. So where you might think that you're actually going to have better performance because you have more RAM, you end up with less. And so if you don't need the additional RAM, why get it? And from what I can see, because I monitor my memory usage here, I'm at 29% now, and I can see when I'm running all kinds of programs what my memory is doing. I don't think I need more than 16 gigabytes right now. If I start running programs that I see my memory is pegged, I can add more. And if that means that I take a bit of a performance hit on certain kinds of processing, well, if I need that 32 gigabytes to do what I want to do, so be it. I'll take the hit. And RAM prices have come down. I think that 2 or 3 years from now, the prices are bound to be lower. So if I need 32 gigabytes or 64, I have a board that will accommodate 64 gigabytes. It may even go to 128. I'm not sure. I think it's 64 though. That's the maximum. Whereas the B450 board, I think, had a maximum of 32 gigabytes. It was half of whatever this is. So that's another reason why the X570 board made sense for me. And that's why I picked up this RAM. And then finally, one of the other things about this board is that the M.2 slot is Gen 4. So Gen 3 will do 32 gigabytes per second reads and writes. Now it doesn't actually do quite that much. I think it does a little bit lower than that, but that's the stated maximum for Gen 3. And Gen 4 is double that speed. So it's stated that it can do reads and writes at 64 gigabytes a second. Now I purchased a Evo 960 Evo. Let's see what the brand is on that. So that's a Samsung 960 Evo, and I think I paid $80 for it. Now the 970 Evo here is just under $90, $10 more, and it's twice as fast. It's Gen 4, so why didn't I buy that? Right? It makes sense. If it's only $10 more, why not get the one that's double the speed? Well, from what I've been reading, the technology for Gen 4 just isn't there right now. That these Gen 4 drives get so hot that they burn out fairly quickly, even with a heat sink on top. And so I thought, well, do I need that sort of speed? What am I doing that requires those read and write speeds? And I couldn't really come up with anything. So I thought, well, I'll get this cheaper, well, $10 cheaper 960, and I can always upgrade it in a couple of years. And maybe the technology will be better by then. And anyway, the board at least will be able to accommodate it if I want to do that. So am I sorry that I got the slower M.2 drive? No, I'm not sorry at all. It's very fast. It's extremely fast. I'm going to do a backup live right now while I'm doing this recording. So I'm just type my password here. No. Yes, I would have been amazed had I gotten that password right the first time. Alright, so I'm just going to create a snapshot here. And there we go. And we're done. So I don't know, I think that's pretty damn fast. I can't think that I would really need anything much faster than that. The only other thing that takes a long time is rendering video, and that's just a few minutes. So really the only thing that I wish were faster is my boot time. I can't speed up the boot that much. It's taking, I don't know, 30, 40 seconds to boot, and that doesn't sound like a lot necessarily, but I boot my system a lot because I try things, I go in the BIOS and make changes and so on, so it really would be nice to have a faster boot time, but it's all right. I can live with that speed. So I think that's pretty much it. I think that gives you my thinking about hardware, my upgrades, motherboard, chip, DDR4 memory, because I bought the 16 gigabyte kit. I couldn't use the DDR3, and the M.2 drive were under $600. I think it was around $550. So if I have to do that every 3 years, then it's less than $200 a year for my system. And I think that's very manageable. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that it's helpful to you, and thank you very much.